Today is Thursday, August 25th, 2005. We're here today to record and celebrate the career of Robert G. Allbee as part of a series of interviews sponsored by the Friends of the Iowa Judiciary and funded by the law firm of Allers and Cooney, P.C. To conduct the interview, we have H. Richard Smith. Dick Smith is a prominent trial lawyer, past president of the Iowa State Bar Association, and former partner of Justice Allbee. I told Judge Bob Hutchison yesterday that we were doing this today. He told me he had been cross-examined once by Dick Smith and that Bob Allbee was a pretty brave man to submit to this interview.
Good morning, Bob.
Good morning.
Your distinguished career on the bench dictates that I should address you more formally, but because of our long and close friendship, close association of practice, you and I have agreed that we'd both be more comfortable if I called you Bob. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And we're here to focus on your time serving on the bench, but I think we need to do that in the context of your life. So let's start at the beginning. Tell us about where you were born and raised, about your parents, about your siblings.
I was born in December 1928 in Muscatine, Iowa, at the home of my paternal grandparents. I am the oldest of 4 children. My parents, George and Ethel Allbee, resided in the Muscatine area at that time. Ultimately, they lived here in Des Moines. That was my family.
Okay. And were you a townie, or did you start school at a country school?
My father had gone to Iowa State University and graduated in agronomy, and his ambition was to farm and manage the Allbee homestead, which had been founded initially in 1856. So we had a country residence. There were 2 homes on this farmstead, and we lived there until I was 15. I went to a 1-room country school, Maple Grove, from through 8th grade. That school enrollment varied from 6 to 12 during my years there in the school.
Before we leave your father, he wasn't a lawyer, was he, Bob?
No, he was not.
But you did have other relatives and ancestors who were or had been lawyers?
Yes. My grandfather, Gus Davis Allbee, was a longtime lawyer in Muscatine. One of my father's brothers, Harvey Allbee, also practiced law in Muscatine for nearly 60 years. And I have a first cousin, Harvey Allbee's son, who continues to be a practicing lawyer in Muscatine.
Where did you go to high school, Bob?
2 places. I first attended high school in Muscatine for 2 years. My father made a decision to leave the farm management and accept a position as a county extension director. There were a couple different places for him to choose from. In those days it was called county agent. And we moved to Lyon County, Iowa, in the extreme northwest, to a smaller town, Rock Rapids, county seat. And my last 2 years in high school were spent there.
A little difference in the size of your class between Muscatine and Rock Rapids?
Yes. I can't give you the numbers now, but Muscatine class was considerably more sizable.
Nowadays, they worry about uprooting children in the middle of their high school and moving them. Did that leave lifetime scars on you, that experience?
No, actually, I had some wonderful friends in Muscatine and involved in various school activities, but I moved to Rock Rapids and seemed to be accepted there, and was likewise much involved in and had an enjoyable final 2 years of high school.
You ever go back to Rock Rapids?
Oh yes, I have been to most of the class reunions, and a year from now I expect to attend our 60th class reunion.
And I know you go to Muscatine, and you mentioned your cousin. Do you still have the Allbee reunions over in Muscatine?
Oh yes, those are a big event annually. We have about eight. We have 8 of 9 living cousins. Or I should say there are 8 living cousins of 9 first cousins, and we gather annually the first weekend after the 4th of July in Muscatine. We stay in various locations, but our central headquarters would be my cousin Harvey's home, Harvey and his wife Joanne. And with children and grandchildren, the number usually amounts to 40 to 50 of us each year, and we have a wonderful time together. A golf tournament, some horseshoes, and a lot of conversation, children involved in a lot of games.
Bob, you wrote a family history and published a book on that, did you not?
Yes. During my years of being of counsel, I have compiled material that I had collected over 30-plus years into book form, and it amounts, with pictures, to about 200 pages. And I was able to trace and authenticate an unbroken line of direct ancestors from 1640 in Massachusetts until this time.
So if any of the viewers want to know more about you than I ask you, they could always buy your book, couldn't they? I mean, on TV, that's usually what they're doing, promoting their book.
The bound volumes are all used up and are in various libraries or held by family members. I have copies, loose-bound copies from which copies could be made, but there hasn't been a big demand.
Before we move on, Bob, tell us just briefly about your high school years. Did you participate in athletics, for example?
Well, I participated in football. People were not of the size in those days that they are now, and I was able to play football. I participated quite a bit in debate, which I think was very helpful to me as far as presenting myself in a courtroom or in public. And I had some class offices.
Bob, tell us about the first time you were ever in Des Moines.
I was 10 years old, a member of the Fulton Township 4-H club, and I had a litter of spotted Poland China pigs that had received a number of blue ribbons at the county fair in West Liberty, and so I was eligible to bring them to the state fair. And in August 1939, I was here with my litter of 4, and that was my first trip to Des Moines. That was eventful for me because somewhere during the days we were here, an older person took us to the Capitol building, and we went through the Capitol, and at that time you could go clear to the very top. And also the governor was not present. We were able to walk into the governor's office, and I was invited to sit in the chair of Governor George Wilson.
Do you recall whether or not you visited the Supreme Court chambers on that occasion?
I do not believe we did.
Bob, you can refuse to answer this next question, but when was the first time you can ever recall being in a courtroom?
Probably during the time I was in law school. I visited the Polk County Court house on some occasions. on a regular basis. It was in my senior year in law school when we were instructed in trial practice by Judge C. Edwin Moore, who was then a district judge and who later became Chief Justice of the Iowa Supreme Court.
We're going to come back later and talk more about your days at the Drake Law School. But let's move on now, and you're graduating from Rock Rapids High School. When and how was the decision made that you were going to go to college?
Well, I had always assumed and expected I would go to college. My father was a college graduate, and my uncles and grandfather and so on. And at an early age, I had, through the inspiration of my grandfather, I had the idea that I wanted to go to law school. So I always expected to go to college, and somewhere in my senior year, a recruiter or somebody of that nature from Grinnell College came and visited Rock Rapids High School, and through the influence of that person, I ultimately enrolled to go to Grinnell College in 1946, following my graduation.
The fact that you were invited by Grinnell to attend suggests you weren't in the bottom half scholastically of your class. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. Now, however, events transpired so that you didn't enroll at Grinnell upon graduation. Is that correct?
That's correct. My class in 1946 was the first graduating class following hostilities in World War II. At that time, there was available a 2-year enlistment in the Navy, which would also, as a result, provide World War II educational benefits, the GI Bill of Rights. I convinced my parents, I was 17 and a half, so I had to have their permission, but I convinced them that going into the Navy would help underwrite my college costs, and being one of 4 children and modest income for my father, they were persuaded. And so I entered the Navy in mid-June 1946 for a 2-year hitch. I was actually discharged in mid-April of 1948.
Tell us a little bit about what you did in the Navy. Kind of highlight those years for us.
It was not very dramatic. Boot camp was rather stark, and there were days and hours when I wondered what I'd done to myself. But anyway, I completed boot camp, and we of course had a battery of testing before we started the workouts in boot camp. As a result, I was selected to go to the Navy's first journalism school, preparing Navy personnel to do journalistic work as a part of public relations. That school was conducted at the Great Lakes Naval Training Station. My boot camp had been in San Diego. So I was by train with half a dozen others. I've forgotten now how many of us. There weren't many. We went to Chicago and then on to Great Lakes, where I went through that school, and then during the rest of my time in the Navy, I worked as a journalist, and in fact a journalist rating was established during that time, and I finished as a journalist 3rd class.
Bob, did that exposure to journalism cause you to reconsider your desire to go to law school and become a lawyer?
No, that's a good question, but it didn't. What it did for me was provide me with some writing experience and perhaps even some writing skills. So it turned out that the Navy experience was not only one that helped underwrite my bachelor's degree, but it gave me some practical experience in writing.
Upon your discharge from the Navy, did you then enroll at Grinnell?
Yes, during the last few months I was in the Navy, while I obtained admission forms and the like from the college, which they sent me, and they sent a test, and I'm not sure what the test was at that time, to my commanding officer, who had me, who supervised my taking the test and sent it in, and I was re-accepted, and I entered Grinnell College in the fall of 1948.
And you were at Grinnell 2 years, and we'll talk about why you left Grinnell later, but tell us about those 2 years. What was it like?
Well, it was, I was really glad to be back in an academic atmosphere. Being in the Navy convinced me of the need for further education. Being in the Navy also gave me some time for maturity and a little travel, because I did get into some, mostly travel within the United States, a little bit in the Caribbean. And I also had a good experience at Grinnell, excellent teaching, good sound professors, good students, and formed some wonderful friendships, as well as I think I even learned a little.
Could you tell us the names of some of the friends you made at Grinnell, that our viewers might recognize those names?
Yes, well, one of my very best friends and a roommate at one time was James Brown, Judge Jim Brown, who was a district judge for 20 or so years out of Osceola. As a matter of fact, I had the privilege of administering the oath of office to him during my tenure on the Supreme Court. Also at Grinnell was Bruce Snell, and we were acquainted, and my sort of worn-out joke with him was that we first, before we served together on the original Iowa Court of Appeals, we also served together in the men's dining room at Grinnell College.
You also had quite an outstanding athletic career at Grinnell, didn't you?
Only I would say that. No, I was on the wrestling squad.
Anything else about your recollections of being at Grinnell that you want to mention before we move on?
Well, as I said, I really enjoyed my Grinnell experience. However, I came to a point where I thought I wanted to get outside of Iowa again. I wasn't sure at that time about spending the rest of my life here. I started looking around for another school where I could meet like people and have a good education. And through some references, I located Colorado College, which at that time was and still is a privately endowed liberal arts college in Colorado Springs. It was Grinnell at the time I was there was probably in the area of 1,000 students. I think Colorado College might have had as many as 1,200. So I sent my transcript and expressed my interest in transferring there, and I was accepted pretty promptly, and so I changed schools between my sophomore and junior year.
Did you mention where Colorado College is located?
Colorado Springs.
Colorado.
Yes.
And that's a lot like Grinnell, isn't it, in terms of the surroundings and the activities you can do? Did you enjoy any of those activities, such as skiing?
Yes. Well, that's the one thing I did learn out there, was to ski. although I was never highly skilled. I didn't have enough time for that, but I found Colorado College to be very comparable, excellent faculty. I enjoyed the school, and I formed some wonderful friends. I did join a fraternity there. Grinnell did not have a Greek system. We lived in dormitories. At Grinnell at that time, you had a men's side of the campus and a women's side of the campus on the south, and so it was much more segregated than in modern, more recent times. As a matter of fact, at Grinnell, when I was a freshman, the freshman girls had to be back in their dorms by 7:30 in the evening on weeknights for study hall.
And it's true, is it not, that both Grinnell and Colorado College were then and are now rated as highly selective by the rating agency, which again speaks to your academic achievements. You don't have to answer that,
well,
but just so
well,
the
at least
viewers
the
know.
college were well rated. And as a matter of fact, George Drake, who was president of Grinnell College from roughly 1980 until the early 90s, was the dean of the faculty at Colorado College at the time he was selected for the Drake presidency.
Were there some friends that you made at Colorado College that have remained lifelong friends that, again, some of our viewers might recognize the name?
I have several very special lifelong friends from Colorado College. The only one that would be recognizable to anyone interested in this interview would be Don Ribble of Cedar Rapids, longtime member of the Lynch and Dallas law firm and the senior partner there for a number of years. Don and I were good friends at Colorado College in the same fraternity, and have maintained our friendship since, and have actually in practice have tried some cases together as co-counsel or counsel for co-defendants.
Bob, we're about ready to move into your legal career, starting with law school, but before we leave, think back over your life up to that point. Is there anything we've overlooked that might have significance that you might want to mention?
No, I was fortunate to have the support and encouragement of my parents in my quest for an education. I feel very grateful for by the availability of the GI Bill, which took me through my 4 years to the time I obtained my bachelor's degree. And I formed lifelong friendships at both Grinnell College and Colorado College. People that I'm still in contact with.
We're talking about your decision to go to the Drake Law School. Would you tell us how that decision was made, why you went to Drake?
Well, as a practical matter, I had used up my GI Bill benefits, and I had no other resources. By entering Drake Law School, my parents had moved to Des Moines in meanwhile, and I was able to live at home where I had a place to stay and good meals. And so mainly I had to raise enough money for tuition and books. And so that was really the basis of my decision, the practical need for it. But I'm very grateful for having attended and received my degree at Drake.
It occurs to me, you mentioned before the GI Bill, it occurs to me there could be some viewers that don't know what you're talking about. So tell us, what was the GI Bill?
The GI Bill, government something, I'm not sure what the I part is, government issue, ordinarily GI. But anyway, that it was an educational benefit for World War II veterans, and I was, even though there were no hostilities, I was considered a World War II veteran. The war was not officially declared over until the end of 1946. That benefit was really a godsend for a lot of us. Now, what it paid will sound strange now. The allowance was $500 per school year for books and tuition. As I recall, the tuition at both the schools, Grinnell and Colorado College, was about $250 a semester. So I had to raise some money through summer employment and the like for books. It also paid a $75 a month stipend for room and board, and that covered my room and board at those schools. So that was the benefit, and that was a universal benefit regardless of where you went to school, whether it was a privately endowed institution or a state institution.
In addition to your classwork, did you participate in other activities at the Drake Law School?
Yes. Some of the upperclassmen got me interested and engaged in Student Bar Association activities along towards the end of my first year. And eventually I served as president of the Student Bar Association. I also joined a law fraternity, which most everyone did. We had two choices. And I served a semester as president of that fraternity. I also drafted wrote a law review article that's never been cited. My friend John Mackaman reminds me of that occasionally. He was the editor of the law review.
And you weren't able to cite it even in your own opinions?
I couldn't find a place for it.
Well, so that the viewers can fully appreciate your being president of these organizations, Student Bar, let them know some of the people that were in your class that became very prominent in the profession in Iowa.
Well, I had classmates or friends from maybe the class on either side of us. The school was smaller then, so we were pretty well acquainted with students at all levels. But Leroy Voits was an early and long-term friend of mine. I mentioned John Mackaman, Terrence Hopkins, Judge Anthony Curtelli. Tony Curtelli was a classmate and a good friend in law school. I was acquainted and friendly with Robert Ray, 14-year governor ultimately. In fact, when I was president of the Student Bar, he was vice president. And Raymond Stefani, whose one of his sons has practiced with us. And I could go on and on, but those are some of the names that come to mind immediately.
Did you do any clerking with law firms while you were at Drake?
Yes. Clerking at law firms was not a general part of wasn't available to most of us then. Between my last 2 semesters in law school, which would have been in late January or probably late January of 1955, I paid a call upon the law firm of Bannister, Carpenter, Allers, and Cooney and asked to see Mr. Bannister because I thought that he and my grandfather were known to each other. And I introduced myself and inquired whether they ever used law clerks, and he allowed us how they hadn't as a matter of practice, but he said to me, are you related to Gus Allbee? And I said, yes, I'm his grandson. And he said, well, Gus was a classmate of mine, and you'll probably be a pretty good lawyer. I'll talk to some of the other people here and see if we can't get you a clerking job. And that's how, so I did clerk there my last semester in law school.
We'll talk later about what that led to, but we want to go back to your Drake Law School experience. Did you involve yourself in what they may call moot court or appellate arguments and that sort of thing while you were at Drake?
Yes, of course, as a senior we all took trial practice, and then from there was an opportunity to participate in oral appellate arguments, and a process for selecting, which still exists, for selecting 4 students to present what we called a moot court argument before the Iowa Supreme Court in the spring. And I had the good fortune of being selected as one of 4 persons to present the argument. And my recollection is it was in very early May 1955, and so that was quite a good experience for me. I recall vividly waking up the morning of the arguments, throwing up, and then I was ready for the day, and the argument it went extremely well.
And did you, in fact, after you had argued and later, keep involved in that program in some way?
Yes, in the mid-1960s, I was invited by, I think, Dean Martin Tollefson, originally, to assist in the teaching and instruction and selection of those persons who would present those arguments, working originally with Judge C. Edwin Moore and then later with Judge Ralph Randall. My responsibility was to formulate or devise the case that would be presented, to oversee the writing of the briefs, to listen to it usually started out with 12 or 16 people, and worked itself way down to 4 who would argue. So I did that for about 5 years, but that involved early evenings, and eventually I decided that was just a little bit longer day than I wanted. So after 5 years, I stepped aside, and they turned it over to someone else.
You've mentioned Dean Tollefson, and of course we could use up considerable time if I ask you to tell some Dean Tollefson stories. I won't do that, but I will ask you, who were some of the other professors teaching there while you were at the law school?
Well, I think we had a very solid faculty. Professor Leland Forrest, Professor Edward Hayes, Professor Richard Hudson, Professor Fred Lewis, who later became a law school dean in at another law school, Professor John Yeager, and I think Professor Gerald Chin was there for a short time, and perhaps one of the finest was Professor Robert Swenson, who left after my first year, but who was a teacher of property and future interests. And I recall entering his class my second semester, which was infamous for repeats, and seeing about a half a dozen upperclassmen, and that reminded me that I needed to give it my best effort.
I want to come back and pick up on that, but before I do, if you haven't already mentioned it, it's true C. Edwin Moore, then a district court judge, taught the trial practice?
Yes.
And that class, tell the people where that was held.
Yes, he conducted the classes in the Polk County Courthouse, and usually in whatever courtroom he was occupying at the time. So we had, in those days, we didn't have the security problems, and so we all assembled in his courtroom. I've forgotten what time, probably around 7 o'clock in the evening for a couple of hours. And those were very interesting, very informative, and I think most of us enjoyed it a lot.
I want you to talk about some of the changes in the law school as it was when you were there, as it is today. And let's start with something you touched upon. I think most would be familiar with the process. You have to go through to enter law school, the application, the committee, the faculty, and all. Was it like that with Dean Tollefson at Drake when you entered?
It required a pulse. They were pretty. It was, law school admission was not all that. I should be careful about that. Law school admission wasn't that difficult, but staying was the test. And there was a tradition that you, on the first day in law school, of a dean at Michigan saying, look to your left, look to your right, only one of you will obtain your degree. And I entered with probably around 60 people, and I think there was, you know, maybe 40 some of us that actually obtained our degrees 3 years later.
The demographics and the makeup of the student body as it was when you were there and as it is today, what changes have there been other than in the numbers? Well,
there were only 1 or 2 or 3 women during the entire time I was in law school. One of the persons who was graduated in the same year that I did was Judge Ruth Klotz, who has been a long-time probate judge and referee here in Polk County, who was an outstanding student.
Tell us about any differences in the physical facilities. I think most of the viewers know the Drake Law School, what it is today. Tell them what it was back when you were there.
Well, it was an entirely different building. It was a building across the street in what had originally been a Carnegie library. In the meantime, Drake had a new library underwritten probably by the university itself, by the Coles family. And so the law school was in that old library, but we also shared that building with some other courses, and some of them involving radio, as I recall, yes.
Many might remember Jim Duncan. Was he?
Yeah, that's the name I was searching for, Professor Jim Duncan, who was, I never knew for sure what all was involved there, but whatever education was given in radio and media, I think that was his area.
Again, Bob, before we move on, are there any other things that stand out in your mind about your Drake Law School experience that you'd like to mention?
It was a very collegial experience. I enjoyed my classmates. People took their work there seriously. But it was while in law school that I learned to drink coffee. There was a place where a lot of us would go between classes, and sometimes we'd even talk about the courses we were taking. And of course, once again, a number of people from those times have been lifelong associations. I know when I was considering law school, my uncle in Muscatine, who was a lawyer, had indicated to me that probably it's best to go to a law school in the state where you think you might practice, because you'll spend the rest of your career associating and dealing with people that you knew in law school, whether they're on the bench or members of the bar, and that those long-term associations can be valuable and enjoyable.
When you graduated from Drake Law School, what did you do next?
I took the bar examination, and we got the bar examination results on a Friday, and the following Monday I was at the offices of Bannister, Carpenter, Allers, and Cooney. I had been in May, before graduation, I had been invited to associate with that firm.
Tell us a bit about what type of practice you were engaged in.
Well, then I had quite a variety of experience. At that time, I named all the partners: Bannister, Carpenter, Allers, and Cooney, and I was the associate. So I enjoyed the experience, but ordinarily I was handed those things that probably the partners didn't want to do. And of course, in those days, I was the runner. I did all the filing and things of that nature at the courthouse, which I enjoyed, getting acquainted with people in the courthouse, finding my way around, having street corner conferences with people I was working with. I'm not sure I answered your question directly, but that's...
You did, and just to emphasize changes, when you started, there were only the named partners, and then you were the sole associate.
Yes.
And what our firm today, Bob, probably has 35 to 40 members.
I think so.
Let's talk about some of the other changes from when you entered the practice and as it is today. Let's talk about hours, working hours. Okay.
Well, the daytime hours were very, very similar in the sense of office hours, but I think most all firms had their offices open until noon on Saturdays, at noon at a minimum, because at that time the courthouse was open on Saturdays until noon. So we had a full staff every Saturday morning, and in that connection, during those early times, the judges usually handled all their motion docket on Saturday mornings. That's when people would come to present or argue their motions or resist them.
Has there been any change in the level of compensation from when you started as an associate and today?
Well, there are many people in the firm today whose services are charged for the same amount that I was paid per month in 1955.
You mean their hourly rate?
Yes.
Okay. And I think, again, the viewers would recognize and be aware of that change. Tell us a bit about, you remember how cases were assigned for trial back in those times?
Yes, I'll go back a little, I'll expand on that a little bit. When I entered the practice, there were 6 judges for Polk County. There was no air conditioning in the courthouse. It could get to be like an oven, the building itself in hot summer days. By tradition, 3 judges would start to take a vacation as of June 1st and return on July 15th. And then the other 3 would take their vacation until September 1st. Usually on about the 2nd Friday in September, if I recall correctly, it would not be the week of Labor Day, but it would be the week after. We had what they called calling the docket, and whoever was handling the assignment would set up, call a docket at 9 o'clock on Friday morning, and the courtroom would just be packed with lawyers, and the judge there would have a list of all the cases in order of their docketing and go through to see if they were ready for trial. And there was always a certain amount of comedy involved in that because some very creative reasons for cases not being ready for trial. But it was sort of a reunion of lawyers after the summer, and it actually was something I looked forward to.
At that time, the courts were not the only governmental offices in the courthouse. Is that correct?
No, that is, I should say, yes, that is correct. All of the county officers were in the courthouse, which, you know, auditor, treasurer, and so on. And of course, also the Board of Supervisors offices met there, the sheriff, and the clerk of court.
Now, do you recall, Bob, how many courtrooms there were at that time? I'm not asking about when you went on the bench, but when you started practice. Can you recall how many courtrooms there were?
6.
6.
It wasn't, within about 2 years of when I entered the practice, there were 2 additional judgeships established for Polk County, and so there were some other areas fixed up for courtrooms. I recall there was a so-called equity court, which was quite small room because it didn't involve jury trials, and the juvenile court area was somewhat smaller than the ordinary civil or criminal courtrooms.
Let's touch upon the changes that have taken place in the trial practice, and first focus on discovery. How much discovery was there in the typical case when you entered the practice?
Depositions were not permitted. Discovery depositions were not permitted. You could use interrogatories. The only discovery deposition experience that I would have had early on would be some federal court cases. I can't recall the year when discovery became available at the state level. It wasn't too long. It was within 3 or 4 years of when I entered the practice. But that, of course, made a most remarkable difference. But even with the new discovery available, it was not nearly so extensive. And most of our depositions would be taken within an hour, hour and a half, maybe less than that.
Are there any other things that stand out in your mind about that period of your life and relating to the practice that you'd like to mention before we move on?
Those were, I look back on those years as being rather special. It was a much more relaxed era with the lawyers and the judges. We always felt we could depend on one another's word in making agreements, resolving matters. When cases were tried, usually the judges would have you into their office, into their chambers, and there'd be some discussion about the case to be tried, and maybe a little bantering or joking back and forth, and usually at the recess we gathered in the judges' chambers. That was a place where some of the people went to smoke, which was supposedly not allowed in the courtroom. Most of the cases, of course, I tried cases that weren't of the consequence that we have nowadays, but I could carry to the courthouse under one arm a briefcase that would cover a 3 or 4 or 5 day trial rather than having it transported in boxes. And it wasn't unusual for to meet your adversary afterwards someplace for a convivial conversation. There was a place called Babes that attracted a lot of the members of the bar.
Bob, so far I've not asked any questions about a wife or children, and the reason is he didn't have a wife children up at that point, did you?
Not for the first 5 years of my practice time. That's correct.
Okay, let's talk about Jenny and your family.
Okay.
How and when did you and Jenny meet?
We met through mutual friends in 1959, and I asked for a date, decided to take her to a baseball game. I don't advise a lot of that to a lot of people. I was really interested in the game, and she was very tolerant. She told me later that I spent a lot more time watching the game than I did talking to her. But about 13 months later, we were married. The morning after that first date and the baseball game, I had been trying an injunction case in Judge C. Edwin Moore's courtroom. He was still a district judge. And at the recess that morning, he leaned over the bench and he looks down at me and he says, Bob, I want to talk to you. And he, as a mentor, often had something constructive to say, whether I liked it or not. And so I went to the bench, and he said, in a stage whisper, he said, "She looked pretty good to me. I think you ought to follow up." So I've always claimed that I was married pursuant to a court decree.
He had seen her at the game, I gather.
Yes. Yeah. He had been at the game. I hadn't seen him, but he saw us. Then Jenny and I have 4 children, and we have 8 grandchildren, and another grandchild on his way, I gather, with our youngest daughter, and that would be her first child.
Tell us about Jenny.
Well, Jenny is a graduate of Drake University in education. The first 3 years that we were married, she taught elementary school in Des Moines, and then with the arrival of our first child, she left teaching, and she didn't teach again until our youngest child, our 4th child, went to kindergarten. Jenny went back to Drake and renewed her certificate, and then became a full-time teacher in West Des Moines the year that our youngest child, Annie, went to kindergarten, or pardon me, to 1st grade. Jenny then later obtained her master's degree at Drake, and she taught 21 years, and she retired a little earlier than she needed to in order for us to be able to do some winter travel.
She received recognition, did she not, for her teaching and her talents, abilities?
Yeah, yes. I'm pleased to say I think she was pretty well regarded, very well regarded in the West Des Moines community, and from Drake she received from the education school, the Outstanding Alumni Award.
And do you know anyone in your family that received a similar award from the Drake Law School?
Yeah, that's very nice of you. I received from the Drake Law School, I received the Drake Law School Distinguished, or Alumni Award for Distinguished Service, I think was as close to what it's called.
And I know you could talk at length about your family and how proud you are of all of them, but is there anything else you just want to highlight before we get into your years on the bench?
Well, I'm pleased to say that all 4 of our children have obtained good educations. Our oldest daughter, Susan, is a Grinnell College graduate. Our second daughter, Carolyn, or Carrie, is a education graduate of the University of Kansas, and has been teaching in the West Des Moines system for 12 to 14 years. Our son, Tom, is a Naval Academy graduate and was a submarine officer for 10 years before leaving the Navy, and is now a vice president with Banks of America. And then our youngest daughter, Annie, is likewise a University of Kansas graduate, but she has an advanced degree from a university in France, and she's been engaged in market research for a number of years in Paris, Minneapolis, and now New York.
You have no lawyers among your children?
None.
And that's pretty typical of our firm, isn't it? I mean, we have had very few offspring of members of the firm who became lawyers.
Yes, I don't know that I want to give any meaning to that, but that's a fact.
Well, it's been indicated by some close to me that I didn't bring home too good of an image of the practice, apparently. Again, before we leave this era of your life, you became a member and active in several professional organizations, did you not?
Yes. I was an early member of the Iowa Defense Council Association, and was president of that association in 1972-73. I was also elected to the American College of Trial Lawyers. That was about 1975, and I take a good deal of pride in that. And then later I was elected to the American College of Appellate Lawyers.
Any viewers may know about the American College of Trial Lawyers, but just if they don't, that is membership's limited to 1% of the practicing lawyers in the state. Is that correct?
That's correct, and the same for the American College of Appellate Lawyers. That limitation applies.
And the American College of Trial Lawyers, you had to have had at least 15 years of experience.
Correct.
And have to pass close scrutiny by your peers. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you did mention, did you not, Bob, that you did become president of the Iowa Defense Council?
Yes.
This is a good place to break.
Okay.
We're close here to the end of this.
Okay.
Yeah, I could use a...
Bob, after about 20 years in the practice, you decided to seek to go on the bench. Is that correct?
Yes.
Tell us how that decision came about.
Well, it was a gradual decision. 2 or 3 years before, some members of the bar had talked to me about being available for a judicial vacancy that occurred at that time at the district court level, and I didn't feel that that I was ready to do that for a number of reasons. But that started the thought process, and then the senior judge at that time was Judge Wade Clark, whom I admired a great deal, and he was chair of the nominating commission, and he also on some occasions mentioned when there might be an opening or the like, and that he wondered if I might be interested. And in the early spring or late winter of 1975, I was in the courthouse and saw Judge Clark, and he said the legislature has just granted us an additional judgeship here. I think it would have been about the 12th or 13th judge in Polk County, and wondered if now might be the time for me to place my name before the nominating commission. And of course I thought about it and talked to my wife Jenny about it, and I did submit my name.
Was it an easy decision to make?
No, it was not. I enjoyed the practice. I enjoyed the people with whom I practiced with, which would include you. There was an economic aspect of it too, because the judges' salaries were less than what I had been regularly earning. So there were several considerations, and I did enjoy, as I said, I was working primarily in litigation. I'd had quite a bit of experience in that, and on the other hand, I thought that this might be an opportunity to provide some service, and it wasn't a lifetime commitment.
Describe the process that one would go through at that time to become a member of the bench.
Well, at that time, we had the judicial nominating commissions for the various districts, and as I recall, there were either 10 or 12 members, I can't remember now, of the commission, equal number of non-lawyers and lawyers, and then the chair of the commission would be the senior district judge, which was Judge Wade Clark. And so persons who were interested in a nomination presented their names, were required to provide certain information, and for the most part, I think, interviewed, and then the commission met and nominated 2 persons for the judgeship, and then the governor, of course, had the final choice between those 2.
When did that process, or about when did that process come into existence?
The Constitution was amended, I think, effective in 1962, taking the judicial department out of partisan elections and creating the selection process that we still have today for nomination and appointment of judges. So that would have been about 13 years at that time.
And describe a little more, if you can, what it was like before.
Well, prior to that, the judges were on the ballot at the general elections for, I believe, 6-year terms. Many of them were nominated at political conventions. Not always. There were some district judges, if there was a vacancy between elections, the governor was given the opportunity to make an appointment. But that often was a partisan appointment. So, as I say, this change in the Constitution was for the purpose, for the most part, as much as can be done, to remove it from politics and to encourage people to seek a judgeship who might not otherwise have done so. And that certainly would be my case if I would not have ever considered it if it were of a partisan election nature.
The Supreme Court judges to get on the ballot were nominated at special state conventions of the political parties. Is that correct?
That's my recollection. Now, I didn't give it so much attention then, very early in my career, because between 1955 and the change of the Constitution, there was only about 7 years. And those were years when I was giving, my undivided attention to learning the practice of law and not giving much attention to the politics of the judiciary. But I think that is correct, that there were special conventions held by both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party to nominate persons for the appellate office.
Now, the process that was in existence in what we're talking about, 1975 or thereabouts.
Yes.
You've described, you've put in your application, and it's going to be considered by the commission. How do you decide what else to do? Do you start taking commissioners out to dinner and sending them gifts, or what do you do?
No, I visited with some of the non-lawyer persons, just contacted and asked if they'd be willing to talk to me a few minutes so they'd know who I am. At that time, the commission was not actually conducting interviews. It does now, I believe. But at that time, all the commission had to go on was the paper that had been presented, unless they'd had a conversation with you. Now, most of the lawyers, we all knew each other, so it wasn't a matter of my making myself known to the lawyer members of the commission, or certainly to Judge Clark. But I don't know that I saw or was able to meet with all of the non-lawyer members, but I know I had brief visits with several of them, according to their convenience.
And once your name had been sent up, does the governor do anything by way of interviews, or did the governor?
Yes, Governor Ray always interviewed every nominee for judicial office at any level. And so I did have a, as I recall, it was in an early evening that I went to the governor's office for an interview.
Did he mention that you'd beat him out for student bar president when you were in law school?
Actually, we weren't. It wasn't a matter of being contestants for the same office, but you know, he being a politician, he hadn't forgotten.
Once that interview is over, what do?
Well, you wait. Governor Ray had a policy of waiting until time was pretty well used up for him to make the appointment. My recollection is the law required that he was to make his appointment within 30 days of receiving the nominations. And the governor usually waited till the 25th, 26th, 27th, 8th day before making the appointment, in order to allow people who had comments to make, letters to write, one way or another, to give them the full opportunity to do so. And I don't recall now. It was within the last 3 or 4 days of that time period that I received I think I received a telephone call from his administrative assistant, Wythe Willie, of my appointment.
You've been appointed to the bench, and you have a first day. You have to show up. What did they do by way of orientation, training, or anything of that nature?
Pointed out to me the courtroom I was to be in, and left a file for a civil bench trial on my desk. How
do you learn how to judge, to be a judge?
Well, I think most of us who went on the bench had had some courtroom experience, and I'd had considerable. So during my years, and in the days after I'd been appointed and before I actually took up my duties, I gave a lot of thought about how I wanted to conduct myself, what I had observed in others that I admired, respected, and what I didn't. And I hoped that I could conduct myself according to my own ideals. So as I looked around, I'd probably at that time tried cases in a minimum of 25 counties in Iowa, in the federal courts in both the southern and northern district, and a lot in Polk County. So and I knew most of the lawyers, which added my comfort level. So I just went on and conducted myself as I had seen others do so in what I thought was the appropriate way.
I assume your law clerk would be most helpful in getting you started.
I had no law clerk, had no secretary.
I was going to say, well, then it must have been your secretary.
Yeah. You have a court reporter, and sometimes the court reporters were pretty knowledgeable, about things, especially helpful in putting instructions together. But any secretarial need had to be attended to by the court reporter.
What were security precautions like at that time?
Well, we didn't really know that we needed security. Most courtrooms had, and what we called in those days, a bailiff, usually an older retired gentleman. The bailiff that I had during the time I was on the district court was a retired police officer, very nice man, very attentive, and very, very helpful in looking after the details and making sure that after a criminal case, all of the drugs and the guns were locked up in a closet where no one else could get at them.
Can you recall, Bob, some of the judges serving on the bench in 1975 when you went on the bench?
Oh yes, there was a fine array of experienced judges. Our chief judge was Gibson Holliday. Other judges, John Hughes, Dale Missildine. Let's see, some of the younger judges were Judge Crouch, Al Crouch. What I considered some of the younger judges would have been J.P. Donato, Leo Oxberger, and my classmate Tony Cortelli. And I'm probably overlooking some whose names don't come to me right now.
Did you serve only in Polk County, or did you travel to other counties?
I was here, primarily here in Polk County, but being district judges, it could be that you would conduct cases in another county. I think I conducted a case, a bench trial in Winterset. I also had occasion, a time or two, to go on what we called court services, and that is to go into other counties for a morning or a day to attend to whatever services were needed in that, which involved probate orders, some juvenile issues, maybe taking some pleas that had been agreed upon, hearing some motions, that sort of thing. And so I did get around our district for that purpose.
That district extend to the Missouri line?
Yes.
And west?
Yes, along the Missouri line we had Bedford and Mount Ayr, and then worked our way north and to Jasper County, Guthrie Center, and Dallas, Madison, Warren, Clark, Union.
Is the story true, Bob, that one time in trying to get down to Bedford you got lost and ended up in Missouri and held court in Missouri?
I deny that. The way that developed was in going between Bedford and Mount Ayr. I had a road construction detour that took me into the top tier of Missouri counties, and I mentioned that to Chief Holliday when we got back, and so he started telling people that I'd gotten lost between Bedford and Mount Ayr and unknowingly conducted court in northern Missouri town, and he knew the name of it. I can't remember it now, and he told that so often I think he eventually believed it.
Bob, are there any particular cases you worked on, any events that occurred while you were on the district court bench that you want to mention before we move on?
Well, it was an interesting time for me and quite a learning experience. I know that I had occasion to, as well as some civil cases and jury cases, conducted a number of, quite a good number of criminal cases. I had to agonize over some custody issues occasionally and some domestic cases. I suppose one of the cases a series of cases that stands out in my mind would be there was a huge drug bust where about 20 or so people were apprehended on one occasion by the Des Moines police, collaborating with federal officials, and those cases were tried in the district court in Polk County, and there was an undercover officer, and there was also a person who had infiltrated or was a member of the organization, I think, and turned state's evidence, I think is the case, and was going to come under the protection of the federal marshals. And I had occasion to try about a half a dozen of those cases. And what was remarkable about them was not only the circumstances out of which they arose and the person who had turned state's evidence, but the security that he was given. There were 3 federal marshals in the courthouse during those cases to protect him. And that gives you pause to reflect when you have a marshal inside the courtroom and one outside the door and another standing up on the balcony where and they were all fully equipped.
What occasioned your leaving the district court bench?
The legislature in the spring of 1976 established a new court, the Iowa Court of Appeals, and that would have 5 judgeships, 5 appellate judgeships. And I had to think about it long and hard whether I wanted to venture into submitting my name. But ultimately, through my own thought process and through others that I talked to, members of the bench and the bar, I did so. And that process took place in late 1970, in the late summer of 1976, in August and July, August and September. And the nominations for that, for the Court of Appeals, came out of the State Nominating Commission, which had been established for the Supreme Court. And that commission, made up of 7 lawyers, 7 lay members, and the senior justice of the Iowa Supreme Court, were to make the selections, or the nominations, I should say, from which the governor would make the appointments.
And how did they submit the names to the governor?
I checked my some notes. There were 39 names that were submitted to this commission for 5 judgeships, and there was some discussion or controversy about whether there should be a series of 3 nominations, 5 of them, or whether they should just nominate 15 and leave it up to the choice to the governor. The commission decided to nominate 15 persons and let the governor make the selection of 5 from that, and that's what they did.
And you were one of the 5?
Yes.
Who were the others?
Alan Donaldson, known as Barney, Bruce Snell, Leo Oxberger, and Jim Carter.
You were chief judge of that first Iowa Court of Appeals, correct?
Yes.
How did you become chief judge?
We met for the first time as the court assembled on November 1st, 1976, in the Capitol building, and on that occasion, the others of the court selected me to be the chief, we didn't have a location out of which to operate at that time, so we were using Supreme Court vacant offices and places of that nature. But from that day forward, I was the chief judge of the court.
And what are the duties of the chief judge?
Well, the chief judge of the Iowa Court of Appeals does not have nearly the responsibilities that the Chief Justice of the Iowa Supreme Court has. It was more a matter of scheduling, assembling the cases, handling any motions that might be pending on particular cases. But a lot of that had already been done by the time the cases came to us, because the cases were fully briefed and ready for assignment by the time they were transferred to the Court of Appeals. And beyond that, it was a matter of presiding in the courtroom and chairing our conferences, which I described before as a little bit like herding cats.
Bob, the establishment of the Iowa Court of Appeals was a major event in the history of the Iowa courts. Was it controversial? Were there other things considered?
Yes, it would take too long to relay all of the controversy. First, the legislature had to be convinced of the need, and then the formation, what form the court would take, whether it would be direct appeal or whether it might be, as it turned out to be, a transfer court, where it was not a court of original jurisdiction, but it obtained jurisdiction of the cases it was to decide through transfer from the Supreme Court. There was also an issue raised by the Attorney General at that time, Richard Turner, whether those of us who were district judges were eligible to take office. And again, that became a major cause for about 2 weeks, and eventually was resolved by the Supreme Court in an opinion entitled Redmond versus Carter. That was, and at about the time that was resolved, well, that's when we convened for our first meeting.
Bob, I'm going to have you speak in a moment to how the appellate courts of Iowa work procedurally, what all goes on behind the walls. But I want to do that, get you to the Supreme Court. But before I leave the Iowa Court of Appeals, were there anything unique and different about how you handle things procedurally as contrasted to the Supreme Court?
Well, we were pretty much in agreement that we would conduct ourselves as what in those days was called a, quote, hot court. That is, we felt that we should be prepared on every case to potentially be the author, so that the cases were not pre-assigned for authorship.